data wonks, they're actually fascinated. Dean Fletcher, Technical Lead IPS, Angie Osborne and Tracy Davis are all going to be making presentations, but I think we have Tracy first.
Thank you. Okay, so firstly, I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for inviting us today. I think when Richard reached out to us, we welcomed the opportunity to come along to engage with our users. This is quite a significant transformation, and the intention is that we go live on July the 1st, 2024, so that date is fast approaching. So I'm responsible for overseeing the transformation, and as we've already said, I'm joined today by Dean and Angie. Dean is the technical lead, so Dean will be talking to us about the quality improvements that we are making, and Angie will be talking specifically about the publication. I'm going to provide a high-level overview on the changes that we're making, and just, I think, the most, for me, probably the disappointing thing about today is not having more time, because I've no doubt, there's going to be many questions as a result of what we talked to you about. So phase 1 of the transformation is what we will cover today, but there's some exciting developments as part of phase 2 of the transformation, which is very much looking at the opportunities available to us with admin data. So quite a few of my colleagues have joined us here today, so if you've got any questions in relation to anything that we don't manage to cover today, please feel free to spend the time talking to us about future changes as well as what we cover today. So just a bit about the background then, really. So travel and tourism data, as we know, is collected from the International Passenger Survey, and the data is collected for the number of completed visits, which are categorised for a period of less than 12 months. So as we know, the data is collected via a random sample, which is face-to-face, and that's at the UK ports. The headline estimates that we produce is the visits to the UK by overseas residents, spending by overseas residents in the UK, visits abroad by UK residents, spending by UK residents abroad, and the average length of stay, which is the annual publication. So just take us back to 2019, so this is where it all started. So the Office for Statistical Regulation conducted a compliance check into travel and tourism statistics, and as a result of that, the Travel and Tourism Review commenced. So the aims of the review were to understand the needs of our users of TNT Stats, to recommend how we transform the statistics, and to agree an implementation plan to deliver that transformation. So as a result of the review, the Travel and Tourism Reform Project commenced, and a final report was published in May 2022, which outlined the changes that we recommended. So this diagram here is TNT Stats as is. So we can see we run the IPS data collection on arrivals. We run IPS departure survey, which feeds into the UK residents travel and tourism data and foreign residents travel and tourism data. We also use some of the CAA and DFT passenger numbers there as part of those outputs. So the Civil Aviation Authority also operate at 7 of the major airports and produce their output. We've then got, in Northern Ireland, we've got the Northern Ireland Passenger Survey alongside the Continuous Household Survey, and we also run the IPS in Northern Ireland as well. And then we've got the GB Tourism Survey, which is run by Visits. So if we look at what the new design entails, so we intend to stop collecting the data on arrivals. We intend to harmonise our departure survey with the Civil Aviation Authority. We intend to stop the IPS in Northern Ireland, and in its place we will use the Northern Ireland Passenger Survey data and the Continuous Household Survey data, and we will create a partnership with Visit Britain, England, Scotland and Wales, and ultimately take ownership of the GB Tourism Survey from January 25. So I'll explain that just in a little bit more detail. So when we stop collecting data on arrivals, what will we do to replace that data? So we will add pre-departure expenditure questions to our departure survey. We will add our post-departure expenditure questions to the GB Tourism Survey, and then we will estimate total expenditure by adding together the pre-departure expenditure and the modelled post-departure expenditure. And then in terms of the passenger survey, so as I've said, we'll harmonise a core set of questions with the Civil Aviation Authority, which gives us a much larger sample size and gives us more consistent data. And as I've already said, we will add those pre-departure expenditure questions onto the passenger survey, which enables us to fill the gaps by stopping arrivals. So that is quite a high-level summary, conscious of time, so I'll hand over to Dean, who will talk to us about the quality improvements.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. I have a condition that affects my balance, which is why I like sitting down when I give presentations. Can the first thing I say is, thank you, Lord, that I am going to get back to Stourbridge tonight, so, because I can't believe I lost my ticket. But there you go. Let me move this down. So the big question that you're probably all asking is, okay, we're doing all of this transformation, but what are we going to get from it? As some of you out there will be users of the data, and a lot of you will be interested in the data, what are we going to get from it? So due to the savings by stopping arrivals, we have agreed to increase the sample by 25% at all airports, seaports and the tunnel. So we did want to increase it by more, but by increasing by 25%, that was operationally feasible. We struggled over recent years to recruit and retain, particularly retain interviewers. And we feel by increasing it by 25%, but obviously reducing it overall because we're not collecting data on arrivals, that will be sustainable in the long term. And also it means that we make the efficiency savings that we want to make. So we were targeted with making over £1 million efficiency savings, and we do that as well. But it's still quite a big increase. And then also by merging, as Tracy said, with the CEA, we'll increase the sample size at I think it's 7 major airports that you can see there by over 100,000, about 100,000 in total. And also we reduce the imbalance. Now, if people don't know what the imbalance is, that's when we underestimate the number of UK residents on arrivals, and this is because we miss UK residents arriving who should be selected for interview, because the traffic flow is too heavy going past our counting points. A number of years ago, I sat at Heathrow Airport, Terminal 5, watching for 8 hours on 2 shifts the flow of traffic, and it was like watching herds of wildebeest going past, where you had like a few people in the lead, and then you had a whole horde of people streaming past, and then a few stragglers at the back, and then nothing. And it's too high a traffic volume for us to select all the UK residents we need to select. And then the second reason for the imbalance is that there's certain countries' residents refuse to take part on departures more than others. And this is particularly prevalent among people from Asia, and particularly Chinese. And again, a few years ago, we had a very crisis meeting with the British Embassy in Beijing. I always remember it was 3 p.m. in the afternoon our time, so it was 11 p.m. at their time, saying what's going on with Chinese visitors to the UK, because you're seriously underrepresenting what we think is going on. And at the time, we were estimating about 250,000 Chinese residents. And we did some an analysis, and we came up with some adjustments that changed that figure to 650,000 Chinese residents that were actually coming to the UK. So we have applied adjustments to correct for those two imbalances that I've just mentioned. But moving to the new design, where we're collecting the sample at gates rather than at counting lines, seems to remove the imbalance pretty much entirely, both imbalances. We still get some imbalance, we think, with some residents who refuse to take part more than others, but people tend to refuse a lot less when you're interviewing them before where they're sitting at the gates waiting to go on the flight. When they've got time, they're not rushing past, they're not trying to get out of the airport or get through security to get to have food or get to the departure lounges. And so we think the imbalance will be a lot less, which will improve the quality of the survey. So this is the current sample. The current sample is about 90 to 100,000, of which 40 to 50,000 are UK and 40 to 50,000 are foreign residents. The new sample will be about 265,000 to 288,000. The difference is because it's a random sample, so you can't predict exactly how much we're going to get. we think we'll get the higher figures more than the lower figures, of which 176,000 to 187,000 will be UK and 88,000 to 96,000 will be foreign. So it's a big increase in the sample, and it will allow lower level estimates, better estimates of regions, country breakdowns, and also we're hoping to produce it 1 to 2 weeks, and we're thinking it's more likely going to be 2 weeks and 1 week faster, as we're not waiting for the CEA interliner data. So at the moment we have to wait for the CEA to provide data of transits, people transiting, for us to remove that from our from the CEA traffic totals, which we calibrate to. So we won't have to wait for that, so we can do it quicker, and we might even be able to speed it up faster than that. Now there is the, being a statistician, I'm bound to say stuff like this, there's the accuracy, there's the law of diminishing returns. So increasing a sample, if you've got a small sample and you increase it by a certain amount, that has a bigger effect than if you've got a bigger sample and you increase it by the same amount. So even though we've increased the sample a huge amount, the impact is big, but obviously we've already got a big sample as it is. I mean, the IPS at the overall level, we're not having much of an impact, because although we're doubling it, the IPS is a massive sample as it is already, so it doesn't have a huge impact. But this is just an example of how things are going to change. So there you see, this is quarter 3 to 2023. So they're the estimates of the number of visits IPS from, say, Spain, and the accuracy level is plus or minus on the estimate of 599,000, 16%, and it's going to go down to around about more like 10%. So we're going to drop it by a third. And the interesting one for me is things like Tunisia, where we've got a confidence interval accuracy of 100%. So that's like saying you have nobody, which is impossible, because we've already collected an estimate of 11,000 people, to double the number of people coming from Tunisia. And now we're going to get down to 67%, which is, is a lot better. And hopefully we're hoping to improve the weighting. We might even get down further. We might even get down to about 50%. That's the plan. And then on the regions and unitary authorities, there's a rule in statistics that you need a sample of about 25 to 30 to be a reasonably sized sample. Obviously, the bigger the sample, the better. And at the moment, on unitary authorities, we're only hitting that target by about 20% of those of unitary authorities. And under the new design, we'll be hitting it with about 50 or 60% of unitary authorities will have a sample size of that size. So it is a big improvement, and it does kind of lead the path to moving to hopefully using admin data as well, integrated with the surveys. Okay, I'm now going to hand you over to Angie, who's going to tell you all about the publications.
Thank you, Dean. Put this down so I can see the screen. Okay. As Dean said, I'm going to talk to you about the publications. At the moment, we have just published quarter 3 for 2023. That was published in January, so I've just got the date there. And the upcoming publications, we're about, as Richard said, we are about to publish provisional data for monthly October, November and December 2023, and that's due on the 26th of March. Travel Trends, which is our annual publication, will be delivered on the 17th of May. I'm afraid the slide has the wrong date on there. Richard had the correct one, but it is the 17th of May. There will also be a publication about the Travel and Tourism Reform Project, which will be produced in July, published on the 14th. Oh, sorry, about changes that will come in July, and that will be published on the 14th of June. So if we look at the publications for the overseas residents, quarterly publications will be published as they are now, and the new survey should have little effect, except for the increased numbers on overseas residents, because we are still asking the same questions which we currently do on our departures survey. One thing about the new data is, as Dean said, there will be some updated regional data, but we are in fact going to publish that for 2023. There's been a lot of work going on within my team to sort out some new data which will give us more varied data. So, for example, for English regions, at the moment we just publish data estimates for London and other England. But in our travel trends in May, we will be publishing English regions separately. I mean, that does depend that we've got the right numbers and sufficient numbers, but it should be, there will be separate. When we publish this data at the moment, we have a 5-year time series, so we are going to publish a back series for you, so you will be able to see the 5-year back series. There could be some slight differences in the numbers, but not any that are significant. When the travel trends is published, we also publish Scottish areas and Welsh areas in terms of unitary authorities. Now, the Scottish areas are going to be very different because I've updated them. At the moment, the tables are based on old areas, which I think were updated in 1996. So I'm hoping that going forward, they will be much more useful to everybody. Wales will remain the same because they were already updated. I think the only difference is that Cardiganshire will be renamed to Ceredigion, which is what it should be. Oh, and I did mention there that I've also been looking at the towns, and so we are updating the towns list which we publish in Travel Trends, which is a list of the top 50 towns visited. In terms of the UK residents, this will make a difference to the new survey will make a difference to the publications. So visits abroad will be published as the timetable currently is, because that data is data that we are collecting on our departure survey, so we should know how many visits there are abroad. It's the spend abroad which will change, and as Dean and Tracy both alluded to, these are being collected in a different way from July. Because we're going to add all the questions onto our departure survey, we can ask most of the questions that we want to ask. So, for example, we will be able to ask where people are going, where UK residents are going, how long they're going to be gone, how long they are going for. But what we won't be able to ask them, and which we currently ask on our arrivals questionnaire, is how much money they have spent in total abroad. We don't expect people to know how much they will spend before they get there. So what we are going to do is to ask them how much they've committed so far. So all those people on the package holidays, they will know how much their package was, and we will be able to collect that. So we are calling that pre-departure spend. And then on the GBTS household survey, we are going to be asking people how much they've spent while they were abroad. That data will then be used to add to our pre-departure spend to give us a total spend. As a result of this, when we publish our spend figures, we will have to publish provisional data first. On the GBTS, we are asking people how many visits abroad they've been in the last 12 weeks. So it gives us quite a long way back, which means that it's going to delay the data that we will be able to publish. So in January 2025, the plan is to provide provisional Q3 expenditure. And then in May 2025, we will publish Q3 finalised, which will include all of that 12-week expenditure period, plus the Q4 annual data. We don't publish Q4 data separately. We always publish it with the annual data. And this is a little bit later than a quarterly release would normally be. So we are hoping that we should have finalised data for spend when we publish 2024 data in May 2025. Going forward from that, on the same sort of timetable, once we get to Q1, we will be publishing provisional spend, and then the final Q1 when we publish Q2. And I think that's what the slide shows. The other thing I just wanted to talk about was just keeping up to date. If you want to hear any new updates on the Travel and Tourism Reform Project, we do have a newsletter, and there is a link there if you want to subscribe to it. I understand you will get a copy of the slides, so you should be able to have that. If you have any questions, there is a mailbox there that you can contact us through. And we also have an expert panel of which Visit Britain is part, and we discuss there all the changes that we are going to make and how we want to sort of take that forward and make sure that it suits all of our users. That's me done as well. I don't know whether there's any questions. I will go and sit down and then we can each answer.
Well, thank you so much, Tracy, Dean and Angie, for that. I'm sure we have some questions. Do we have any questions? A question over here. Why don't you go there with the microphone? I'll go here with the other one. Kate.
It's a question about the CAA data.
Yeah.
How were the airports selected for the additional information? Because they're very London Midlands centric with the addition of Manchester. So you've got gaps in regional England where I certainly know from the West of England region 50% of visitors are coming through Bristol Airport. So it would just be, I'm just interested in how they were selected and what the impact might be.
Okay, I don't really think I can answer that because it depends on what the CAA actually want to interview. So although the CAA only interview at those airports, and you're right, they are quite often sort of London based. Part of that I think is because that's where we get the volume of traffic coming through. So they are more interested in the numbers. But we will still be interviewing at all of the airports. So we are still interviewing at Bristol. So it won't increase our sample size, except by the fact that we are going to increase it generally by 25%.
And can I just add, the CAA do a rotation around regional airports where they do interview at like Bristol, but it's every 3 years, so we can't use that data to integrate with, but they do interview at those airports as well.
Okay, Deirdre.
I'm not sure this is a question for the ONS team, and thank you for the presentation. It might be more of a question for Richard Nichols from VB, or indeed just a sort of existential question. I suppose it's fantastic all this is happening. What do we think is going to be the most impactful data that's going to come out of this in terms of influencing policy over the next while? Is it that we're going to get a more robust data set that's going to prove the value of the industry? Is there any sense of what, how we can use this to maximum effect in terms of influencing policy?
Yes, please. Yes, passing to Richard.
I'll start with this. Is this working? Yes. Okay, great. Well, for me, one of the big things, and my eyes absolutely lit up when OAS first mentioned this, was larger sample size. As Angie said, once if you're looking at the total UK level, then it's pretty robust and the confidence intervals are quite small. When you get down to the regions or the individual markets, that's where the numbers can get quite have those high confidence intervals. So if you want to look at the local authority data, that's where it makes a huge difference, increasing the sample size.
Thank you.
It's also, so there's another one actually from me, which is the whole process of integrating the two surveys is a big cost saving. So it saves us money, it saves ONS money, and that means from our point of view, we've got money to spend on other things like the visa data.
Can I just ask a question about comparability with previous year's data? And, you know, sort of presumably collecting new data in this new way will, no, not presumably, but if you're collecting data in this new way, will it be comparable with previously collected data? So will we see we'll be able to evaluate trends as a result of that?
I might pass to Dean on that, but I mean, it is something that we have thought about and we are investigating, but yeah, I'll let Dean answer that.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's the one our deputy director, who's the senior responsible owner on the project, gets sleepless nights over, isn't it? But we've compared the IPS with the CAA data, and it's very comparable. There are some differences which we're harmonising the IPS, so it will, when we're collecting data at the gates, to make it completely compatible with the CAA. We also got a plan to address discontinuities. If there are step changes in the data, we've got a plan that was developed by Professor Paul Smith at Southampton University to apply adjustments to the series, which will make it consistent if there is a step change. We don't expect there to be a step change at the overall level, but when you drill down to the lower levels, if you're going, there might be changes there which we will have to apply adjustments, but we've got a team, a dedicated team looking at this during the transition period.
David.
Apologies if this is a bit of a naive question, but I'm thinking to myself, if you want to know where people go, you can find out now from places like Forward Keys that has a sample size of more than 50% of the market. So why bother to ask them? And if you want to know how much they spend, you can go to the credit card companies. So why bother to ask them? Or am I missing something in, you know, what you get from the survey, and therefore what are the real USPs from the survey against all of this data that one can buy from what people actually do?
Yeah, maybe.
So for me, there's a few reasons. So some of the sources that you've mentioned, yes, we're looking into as a measure. You get mobility data from the mobile phone operators, Visa card spending data. Each of those has its limitations. So Visa data, for example, the penetration of cards varies hugely from country to country. So it might give you a really good estimate of where people from one country are, but for somewhere like China, it's rather less robust because the penetration of Visa is so much lower. Similar for the mobile phone operators, if it scrapes from Telefonica or EE or whatever, that's only providing part of the market, and that will vary from market to market. And then it will not even capture for those who don't even have their mobile phones or their apps or whatever switched on. So each of those has got a limitation. The other, whereas for the IPS, it's asking, it's designed to ask as representative of a population of as possible. So it's got sample size limitations, but it hasn't got some of the representative limitations in the same way. The other is that it does link to all of the other questions that they've got on the survey. For a mobile phone scraped mobility data, it might not tell you exactly what kind of trip they're on, whereas the IPS, it asks you journey purpose. And so it can link to all of these other things that they've got on the survey. The mobile phone won't tell you spend. IPS will give you an estimate of spend. Visa data has spend, but it doesn't have other things. So it links up all the key indicators quite nicely. Now, I'm also a believer in you need a kaleidoscope. You need to kind of see through lots of different prisms. IPS gives you a huge view. Card spending gives you another view. Mobility gives you another view. And you look at all of those together, and you reach the truth from many, many different angles.
Wonderful endorsement of IPS from one of its leading customers. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we need to give the ONS a big round of applause.